Hey everyone, my name's Kevin Owocki. I'm the founder of Gitcoin, and I'm going to be introducing some of the ideas behind Gitcoin 2.0 in this talk, and also talking about how public goods funding is not just something that we do because we're altruistic, but because it's a competitive advantage for your ecosystem. Meta stands for the most effective tactic available, and in this talk, I want to talk a little bit about how I think that public goods funding can be a competitive advantage for blockchain-based ecosystems. And basically what that does is it unlocks a whole bunch more capital to go to public goods funding if the biggest capital allocators in the space are allocating capital to public goods. And if we can first do it for EVM-based ecosystems, what would it mean if we reached a critical mass and honed the tools, and then we can eventually go mainstream and do better public goods funding in the real world using these tools eventually. So public goods funding, the next meta, is all about that view, and I'm also going to sprinkle in some ideas about Gitcoin 2.0, which is the latest version of Gitcoin that we've just announced over the last couple months. So I'll start with a high-level frame. In January of 2024, Justin Drake, who is an Ethereum core developer, said on Bankless that layer 2s compete on tooling, liquidity, virtual machines, tokenomics, public goods, security, and business development. Okay, so we're all competing to expand block space to the world in these different layer 2s, Arbitrum, Optimism, ZK Sync. There's a long tail of public goods that are out there. And they're competing with each other to attract builders to them, to attract users to them, to attract TVL on all of these different layers. Gitcoin equals grants equals growth. And we are building a capital allocation ecosystem which is going to allow people to fund what matters to their communities in the future. And we're doing it not just because we are altruistic, but because it is a competitive advantage for your ecosystems to be allocating capital, and is going to help your ecosystem attract the best builders, the brightest minds. So underneath the hood of grants, I view what Gitcoin is doing is building a capital allocation machine as a means of making sure that the right builders are the ones who are getting capital in the ecosystem. So the most naive version of a capital allocation machine, and by the way, capital allocation is just deciding who to give money to. It's basically the process of deciding what to fund. A naive version of capital allocation is just doing an airdrop. Is that the first thing that you could do, and the most naive thing that you could do if you're trying to allocate capital to people who are doing good work in your space, is to do direct grants. Basically, I am a centralized treasury administrator, and you can apply to get money out of the treasury using a direct grant system, maybe an RFP system. Very simple way of creating a drip of funds to people who are doing good stuff in the ecosystem. Has been through quadratic funding, which basically is based off of this idea that instead of a central power broker giving out money to an ecosystem, you actually have a pool of funds that is allocated according to the needs of everyday people in your ecosystem. It's called retroactive public goods funding. It's based off of the idea that it's easier to decide what to fund in retrospect as opposed to in the future. So it's easier to say what public goods have been good in the past as opposed to speculate on what public goods could be good in the future. So Gitcoin is now traversing this design space, and I think that we're uniquely positioned to do it because we've done $60 million worth of funding through 4 million unique transactions to about 4,000 creators over the past. And so we are, I think, uniquely positioned to be building these capital allocation machines for everyone in the future, and explore this design space of what I call on-chain capital allocation. The potential here, this design space that I see, is to do democratic, transparent, accessible, and powerful capital allocation, and it's going to be evolutionary, right? Gitcoin grants round 1 was horribly naive in the past, but every time we run one of these experiments, we have learnings, and then we design another experiment, and then we just iterate towards a higher local maxima from there. And I kind of think that iteration, this is what that looks like. So basically, if you think about the search space of possible capital allocation mechanisms that are available out there and the amount of value that they could create for these communities, each experiment is just sort of like a naive attempt at realizing that value creation, and then you iterate towards the possible future design space of what's possible. And by the way, there's not just one local maxima that you're looking for. There's going to be multiple local maxima of what's possible within these communities. Direct grants climbs the local maximum of how do we do very simple capital allocation to these communities. Quadratic funding is finding the local maxima of how do we do democratic capital allocation. retroactive public goods funding? How do we do retroactive contributions? Okay, so the way that we're going to iterate this design space, remember what I said about at the start. Capital allocation systems have money in and data in, and then allocate money on the other side of the equation. So basically tokens into Allo, which is our capital allocation protocol, registry of projects, which is basically data in, and then that goes into Allo, and then it is routed through a strategy, which you can think of as a way of just opinionated way of allocating funds to a community. And what's powerful about this being modular is that we can put multiple strategies into the same system, and they can work with different tokens and registries, okay? So quadratic funding and retroactive public goods funding can be put side by side with each other in this modular infrastructure, and they can work to side by side in the same ecosystem to fund what matters to these ecosystems. And the sum result is that we're just gonna make not only allocation smart contracts that allow you to allocate capital to your ecosystems, but we're also gonna have no-code tools like Gitcoin Grant Stack that allow you to just pull it into your ecosystem, run quadratic funding, run retroactive public goods funding for your ecosystem, and to do it without having to code at all. Right now, Gitcoin supports direct grants, quadratic funding, and retroactive public goods funding, and there is billions of dollars of capital that will be routed over these things in the next cycle or so. But what kind of future stuff can we build in this pluralistic design space? I've got a bunch of different things that we're going to be building into Gitcoin 2.0, and when you choose to allocate capital through Gitcoin and Grant Stack, then you're betting on an ecosystem that is going to continually be adding more tools to the toolbox. So anyway, in sum, I think that public goods isn't just for hippies anymore. It's something that you do because it's a competitive advantage for your ecosystem. And we're going to pioneer the tools and the liquidity going into these ecosystems this cycle. And then a couple cycles out, they're going to spill out into the mainstream and help cities and countries allocate capital to their citizenry in a way that elevates impactful builders. I think funding your public goods is a sustainable competitive advantage, and that's what Gitcoin 2.0 is designed to support in this cycle. We support 3 different mechanisms for doing it right now, but we'll soon have more. And yeah, that's my talk. Thank you.